Laura Creed, and I am the co-chair of the League of Women Voters, Greater Cleveland, Shaker Heights chapter. And it's my pleasure to welcome all of you here. My co-chair, Mary Levine Butler, is in the back. Wave, Mary. So, thanks to Mary, and thanks to everyone for coming tonight. Just to give you a little information about the format, the mayor is going to give a State of the City address, which will last 30 or so minutes. And then we're going to open it up for Q&A. There's several people here who have note cards in their hands, or you've gotten note cards. So if you have a question, please write them down, and you can hold them up, and we'll come and pick them up for you. And that way we can put them together so we don't get 10 of the same question to give it to the mayor. So that's our format, and then afterwards we hope you will join us for some birthday cake for the mayor. It was his birthday yesterday, so happy birthday, Mayor. And so that's it in terms of format. So I'd like to introduce the mayor, and like many of us here in the room, he's a longtime resident of Shaker Heights. And he was involved in city council and the planning commission and board of zoning appeals before he became the mayor. He is an attorney, and even though he went to University of Michigan undergrad, he went to the Ohio State Law School, so it's okay. So he is also the owner of Juma Gallery and Brew, as many of you know. So without further ado, let's all welcome the mayor. Thank you.
Yeah, so there are a couple of fun things that I get to do as mayor that are really, besides coming to talk to you. One I didn't know about. My predecessor, Earl, never mentioned to me that I got to marry people, so that's actually kind of cool. So I enjoy that part. The other part is, of course, talking to kids, right? I mean, there isn't anything better than talking to kids. So I went to Mercer's kindergarten classes yesterday to speak, and somebody had spilled beans about my birthday. And so when we got to the Q&A part of the session, somebody raised me, and I said, "What's your questions? How old are you?" Okay, I said, "Well, being the honest guy that I am," I said, "I'm 58. And he said, "Wow, that's really old." He said, "That's almost 60. Now, I told him I appreciated him reminding me of that fact. But I also was probably a little more impressed that a kindergarten knew that 60 was pretty close to 58. So I was actually pretty impressed with his math skills. So in any event, let me start by thanking the League of Women Voters for sponsoring our event tonight. It's a lot of work and time and effort to coordinate, and so I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I would be remiss if I didn't at least note a few elected officials who I think I saw come in. Vice Mayor Ann Williams, just raise your hand. Councilmember Sean Malone, I saw back. School board members Lisa Kremer, I saw, and Jeff Isaacs. So you can ask them all kinds of questions too. I also saw Amy Schweitzer from the library. Hopefully I didn't miss anybody else. Of course, I also want to welcome Earl Lycan, our former mayor for 10 plus years. So I didn't tell him this before, but of course, if I can't answer a question, then I'm completely deferring to Earl, and he'll answer it if I'm able to. Let me just, also before I discuss the preliminary matter, I know we have a lot of staff here, but if you're staff, would you just stand up or just raise your hand for a minute, just wave. So these are all people who have been around for a lot of years and will answer your questions, and frankly, I'm honored and privileged to serve with them. So with that, let me just jump right in, and if I talk too long, I think Julie, somebody usually gives me one of the high side, so I'll try to stay on track. Some of you may have heard a little bit about what I'm going to talk about because I mentioned it when I was sworn in after the election in November, and I have started to speak a little bit about this in other formats. But basically, I'm incorporating the state of the city into where I think our priorities need to be over the coming years, and where I and the staff and council have spent a lot of time over the last few months. I'm here to talk for a little bit, but I'm also here to listen. As most of you know, I've been in office for less than a year, so I am very much still learning. Every day I learn something new, and I learn a lot from coming to events like this and talking to you all. So I appreciate the tough questions and the easy questions, and nothing's off the table. I would challenge you as I talk tonight and we talk, I would challenge you to do two things. One is try to look at the city and the initiatives that we're undertaking on a holistic basis. These are not siloed, one-off kinds of events. These are things that all become part of the fabric of our community. And it's really important that no one thing is done without in ignoring the other components of it. The other piece that I would challenge you to think about is a long-term view. Shaker's been around for a while, and things don't just change overnight. And some of the things that we're undertaking currently, right now, are things that are going to take some time. And so if you're looking for a quick fix or a quick answer to some of the things that we're working on, I'm probably going to disappoint you. But I think it's the right answer, and it's the right decision for us as a community. And so kind of keep that in mind. And when I say long-term, I'm like 10, 15, 20 years in some cases. Others more current. So there are three things that I've kind of named as sort of the theme. Momentum, change, and progress. And so on the momentum side, there is a lot of good things happening in our community. Shaker is still a premier community in many ways to live. We're noted both as a place to live locally as well as in the state and nationally. Not that we put an emphasis on this all the time, because they're not always accurate, but rankings, I'm sure most of you saw it was on social media. Niche noted that we're one of the top communities to live in. And while that's, you know, in and of itself is not critical, but what I think what is important is that we often get tied up and caught up in what's going on in our community, whether we like something or we don't like something, we want to change something or we don't. We don't always take a step back and think about how many people outside of our community admire Shaker and look to Shaker for guidance and leadership. And so I think it's noteworthy when you see some of these once in a while, these rankings, that people actually do acknowledge that we do a pretty good job most of the time. Not all the time, but pretty well most of the time. So, having said that, however, we definitely don't rest on our laurels, and so we need to continue to work very hard every day to maintain the reputation that we have. Change. In my book, change is a good thing. 99.9% of the time, something good comes of it. Not always, but for the most part. But with change comes successes and failures, and I'm a big believer in that you can't be fearful of failure at the expense of actually making change. And so that's what we're doing, and we're doing it every day, and we're not afraid if we fall a little short of our goals. Lastly, progress. I'm a big believer also in making slow and steady progress. You keep your eye on the ball, you don't go for the short fix, easy fix here and there, you put it in the hopper, you work on it every day, and you make progress. So with that, let me jump into essentially 8 different priorities that I'm focusing on. So the first, and I'll spend probably a little inordinate amount of time on economic development, because as most of you know, that is really at the heart and soul of much of what's going on in the city right now, some of which you know and others you may not know as well. But let me just say that between lost revenues, which we'll talk about in the city from the state of Ohio, cuts in expenses, decreasing staff size, regionalism where appropriate. Bottom line is we need to expand our tax base beyond the design community as a residential, as we all know, and to create jobs and economic development. So many of you may know I meet generally with the department heads in the city once a month, sometimes twice a month, Economic development, we meet once a week. We spend several hours every single week addressing each of the projects that we're looking at. We're meeting with businesses, developers. We retained, I did see actually Russell Baruch. Russ, just raise your hand. Russ is assisting us while we're in our search for our economic development director. Russ is an experienced real estate and economic development professional, a very creative guy who's been working with our staff in this area. We're doing lots of things in economic development, not just the things that maybe get the press every day. So let's start out with some of the things, some of the areas within the city that we are looking at. But obviously, we start with Van Aken. Phase 1 is open. The offices, the office building is, I'll talk about, is almost nearly leased. The apartment building is open, now more than 70% leased. We have retail stores opening. If you haven't been to the market hall, you're missing a lot. So you should go up there, and if nothing else, you got to go to Mitchell's for ice cream, right? Mm-hmm. So, but what you see again in this aerial photo is really just phase 1. We've got multiple phases that we continue to work on every day. So phase 2 is further residential, multi-story residential that will go on the Farnsley lot, which is right here next to the rapid tracks, sometimes called the RTA lot, right next to the Ohio Savings Building. Some other worthy sites to note, this is the Quay Buick site over here. We are working actively on that site. Just off the map beyond the parking lot here is what we call the office parcel, slated for a multi-story office building, right in the corner of Chagrin and Warrensville. Off the map here, a little bit right over here, is Shaker Rocks. If any of you got a chance to take a little preview of the rock gym, it is fabulous looking. So lots going on. Down Warrensville, off even a little further, is the Wendy's on the corner. That will be torn down this spring, if you weren't aware, and will be rebuilt. We've got some vacant land to the south of Wendy's that we're also actively looking to pursue. We are also aggressively attracting new businesses to the community. I mentioned the office building. We are actively working with a business that will take the last office space in the office building, so you'll be at 100% leased in the office building, which is very positive. It also gives us some momentum for the office building on the corner. Second area, the Chagrin Lee, or sometimes what I refer to as the kind of the west end of the city, and that picks up Lee Road from Chagrin down to Scottsdale. It also picks up Shaker Town Center, the south side of Chagrin, and some of the surrounding areas. This is an area of the city that I pressed and have talked about a lot. Van Aken has had a lot of the attention because of the newness of it. But Lee Road is something that I also think provides a critical location for the city to engage in the neighborhoods and support the neighborhoods on either side, Moreland and Lomond, and also attract a different kind of business user. Some of the other sites that we are actively working on and looking at in the Chagrin-Lee district area are Avalon Station 2 along Van Aken. It's a vacant parcel that we are pursuing. I'm in regular communications with the owner of Shaker Town Center and continue to talk to them about their future plans. South side of Chagrin, for those of you who were at Master Mar's grand opening for his new building, we'll chat about that. We're also actively looking on the south side of Chagrin. With respect to Lee Road, though, let me just say that this is a really interesting and intriguing and challenging project for us. But my vision for Lee Road, particularly from Chagrin down to Scottsdale, is a complete makeover, frankly, of that corridor. So it will involve redoing the traffic, it'll involve redoing streetscapes, it'll involve attracting new businesses to some of the successes that we've had, but there are many others that are not where we need them to be. And some of that will involve acquiring properties. So we'll talk a little bit more about some of our successes and where we have some work to do there. Other locations that may kind of go under the radar screen for you a little bit, but the block at Elmar on Warrensville, Fairmount Circle is now being leased by Corlin Company, so there are some vacancies at Fairmount Circle that we are working on as well as Larchmere. One of the things, though, frankly, and why we're spending so much time on the physical aspect of the city and buildings and real estate is that what we found over the last year in particular, that the types of businesses that we're looking to attract, we've had some successes and we've had some failures, and we look at why were we successful in some cases and not successful in others. And in many cases, it's because we don't have product. We don't have the physical facilities to attract the kind of businesses that we need to attract to Shaker. And so we are exploring all kinds of things. And so if you don't know the geography of Lee Road as well, on the building side, the east side of Lee is very different than the west side of Lee, both in terms of depth and geography and characteristics. And so we are looking at both sides. To be honest with you, we've had some successes like Process Canine and the Cigar Bar and some others on Lee Road, but others, frankly, there's some longtime owners who have not been investing in their buildings, and we're kind of going to them and saying, hey, get on board and reinvest in your buildings and your property and in our community, or step out of the way and let others step in and transform that corridor. We are working hand in hand. Nick Fedor is here from the Shaker Heights Development Corp. Down in the dealership. We are working very, very closely with Nick. He's been a tremendous help in our efforts there. Sort of, if someone asks me what's the successes and what aren't, we lost a technology company because frankly we just didn't have a building that fit their purposes. Today we're negotiating with a very interesting engineering firm out of Michigan that we think we have a reasonable shot at getting. And again, it's do we have the product that enables someone to come in today as opposed to saying, well, we'll have something for you, but it'll be a year or more down the road. At the end of the day, however, what drives us and the economic base are jobs. And so we're focused on jobs. Just to go back to the Van Aken district for a moment, to give you some statistics, we have currently over 160 new employees that have started over basically in the last 12 months. We haven't had 160 new employees probably since Office Max opened up many, many moons ago. We have more than 400 part-time and full-time retail employees. And the payroll coming out of Van Aken district now is estimated at over $21 million. So these are very positive signs. So let's talk about just one quick success story, and that's Process Canine. I know many of you frequent and support Amanda, who's the owner of Process Canine. This is a great story. Amanda moved from Cleveland Heights to Shaker. It's a doggy daycare. It's in the old Lee Road nursery site. New business, growing, but she needed a space, and we kind of scrambled to find something with the help of Nick and the Development Corp and others in our community. A group of Shaker investors came together to buy the property for her and lease it to her with an option to buy. This is a model that we are really excited about and looking to replicate, where we have people who really care about our community. They don't want to lose money, but they don't necessarily have the same return threshold as others because they're really investing in our community. I'm happy to say that she needs additional space, and we're now looking and have under contract property adjacent to her existing site for her to grow and expand into. So this is the kind of thing that, it's tough. It's blocking and tackling. It's day in and day out, knocking on doors and working hard. So that's economic development. Fiscal stewardship. In the tradition of Shaker, we continue to manage the city very conservatively. We have preserved, where some cities have not been able to, preserved our year-over-year reserve to protect against downturns. We had an expanded budget process this year. more robust, started earlier, more public input. We've also expanded some internal safeguards, things like creating a risk management task force that I thought was really critical to take advantage of a lot of the expertise that we have in our community to help mitigate against future risks. We have challenges, there's no question about it. Obviously, state funding cuts between the estate tax and the local government fund continue to present challenges to us. Tax challenges, revenue challenges also are there. The change in federal tax law on the deductibility of state and local taxes has had an impact and continues to have an impact. We're in the midst of negotiation of our forward labor contracts. We have a very good relationship with our employees and our unions, but we're in the midst of that as well. So some challenges, but council and the administration has been very conservative in making sure that we're preserving our and using very efficiently our limited tax dollars. One of the things that's gotten some press of late, which we are very excited about, and one of sort of my signature initiatives is the Joint Facilities Task Force. For those of you who might not have heard about it, it's basically a collaboration between the library and the schools and the city. I'm very pleased to have our partners, the cities and the school and the library work with us to put together essentially a long-range master plan for all of our facilities. So instead of talking about a city building or a school building or a library building, talk about what does the community need and how are we going to both anticipate those needs and then how do we get there? How do we get from point A to point B? And ultimately, how do we fund that? And so we're looking, hopefully we'll be looking at some creative models to do that. This is about a 7, 8, 9 month process, which is just actually the first stage of this process. To kind of collect information from the community. We'll have a lot of public input. We actually kick off next on the 26th of March, where we're having a panel discussion of experts to really just talk about the future of cities, libraries, and schools, and their physical and facility needs, and how we might better cooperate as a city to achieve that goal. The next area that continues to get our attention is attracting and retaining residents. This is a pretty big bucket of things to talk about, but and I've listed just a few, frankly, of the items here. Sense of community, I think, is one of the things. Let me back up and start by saying, you know, when I'm out and about talking about the city and why people should move to Shaker, and I was saying right before we started that when I meet new people, I always ask, do you live in Shaker? And many times they say yes, and if they say no, I always tell them, well, that's okay. There are two kinds of people: those that live in Shaker and those that will eventually live in Shaker. So, you know, we welcome you with open arms. But when we talk about what makes Shaker special and what makes it unique, what are the special assets that enable us to attract residents to our community and retain residents? One part is a sense of community, and that is really a top reason when we do surveys of the community. It's a top reason why people choose Shaker. People know their neighbors, they see them, they walk their dogs on the sidewalks, they get to know them. Many people in this community, me included, have had multiple houses, sometimes 2, 3, 4 in this community, and there's a reason that they do that. Another big piece of it, one that's become increasingly important, is being able to be a walkable community. And again, I met a family who just moved back from further east, who said, I moved out, and I realized there are no sidewalks. And I can't, you know, I don't know my neighbor. There's no mechanism for me to meet my neighbors. Well, obviously, in Shaker, the statistics that I have are basically within a quarter mile. Almost every house is within a quarter mile of the rapid station, 200 miles of sidewalks. And when I talk to young families who are moving back to Shaker, it's invariably it comes up. I want to be able to walk, and that's part of what makes the Van Aken district so attractive, and what we're hoping to make the Lee corridor so attractive, to make sure that people can walk to their work, to their business, walk to a restaurant, and walk with their children. Public schools, obviously, are these were by the way are not necessarily in order, but the public schools are critical. Again, the young people that I met over the summer at block parties, absolutely, every time it comes up, I lived here, I lived there, but the bottom line was I came back in many cases for the schools. And I've met people who came from as close as Cleveland Heights or Lakewood to as far away as Tibet, literally, who came back here to our community to raise a family. And in large part, it's because of the schools. A lot going on in the schools, and for those of you who don't know me well, I'm a straight shooter. Nothing's off the table. I say what's on my mind. There's no hidden agenda. So, you know, Jeff and Lisa, I think by their own admission, would say, hey, it's been a bumpy year over the last year in some regards. But at the same time, the schools continue to do an incredible job. We now have a new superintendent. The statistics and the experience that most students are receiving, most students are receiving in our schools are fabulous. I'm in and out all the time. I know, Jeff, you leave in a week for a trip to Italy with the band. I mean, most communities just don't have those kinds of opportunities. We continue to rank at the highest end of our National Merit Scholars. To me, the IB program, again, is one of our selling points. There are very few communities that have K through 12 IB programs. And again, hats off to our school board and to the school administration. I will also tell you that, just as an aside, I meet with the school, whether it's school board members or the superintendent, regularly. I mean, literally like every few weeks. And the relationship between the city and the schools has never been better. We are collaborating not only on not only on the task force, the facilities task force, but a wide range of topics, whether it be after-school care, to facilities, to how we can better market what we're doing in the city. Obviously, Fernway was a significant issue. We continue to work closely with the schools, both on the reconstruction of Fernway, as well as trying to bring some money in. So we are jointly working together on a grant application to rebuild part of the playground at Fernway, and with any luck, we'll see if we can help contribute to the cost of repairing Fernway. We obviously also have incredible housing options, and my goal, and I think all of your goal, and I know Earl's goal, was to provide a wide range of housing options for all ages and all stages in one's life, from single homes to doubles to condos, townhomes, apartments. What we're trying to do is provide an opportunity for a wide spectrum of our community, of our region can live in Shaker at a variety of price points and in a variety of styles that meet everyone's lifestyles. We're working very hard on infill locations where we have opportunities for new construction, being a built-out community. It's harder to find those, but things like the Van Aken district, where we have new construction there, or what we're doing with the infill locations in the Moreland area. We've got new prototype, new constructions, and we're working with developers to come in and build more on the infill housing side. Of course, the last item I just bring up here, which is no news to any of you, is the extraordinary beauty of our community, between the lakes and the forest and the parks. But it takes constant effort, whether it be the improvements that we made to Hildana and Shelton, whether it's the lake dredging and the dam repairs that we're doing to our lakes, and new bike paths and walking trails. Really running everywhere from the Nature Center all the way to the Warrensville area. So that's the next area. We move on then to government efficiency and modernization. We are always working on how we can do things more effectively and more efficiently with limited resources. I'll give you just a couple areas where we're doing this. Most of you, I hope, have seen our new website. We've tried to consolidate lots of different sources of information into one place. And we're moving forward, frankly, on some infrastructure things that we have not spent nearly as much time on and money as in the past as we probably should have. We're moving forward on an intranet project to better serve our customers internally. Just to give you one example where we're using technology as a way to increase our service. We are part of a consortium that is buying technology that will expand and really make much more efficient our process for point of sales, certificates of occupancy, and permitting. Ultimately, the goal is to be able to go into a building or a house with an iPad, do your inspection, and be able to get that report out to residents, frankly, before they leave the house or the building. We've made some modernization and renovations to City Hall, everything from putting in a new elevator, which caused a little bit of consternation over the course of the past year as I kind of slowed the project down a little bit while we looked at it, making sure that we could actually access all of the space in City Hall so that we'd get a good use of those tax dollars with the new elevator for the next 50+ years. We've added, expanded Wi-Fi, some additional security, as well as a variety of other upgrades to improve operating efficiencies. I will say, with the loss of some of the revenues, that we have decreased the size of our staff. Frankly, to some extent, I've gotten some feedback that has said, maybe we need a little more staff to do some of what we want to do. But I will tell you, the staff, as I noted here, bright and dedicated. I can't begin to tell you the number of hours, and frankly, I've made their jobs a lot trickier since I've been here, throwing a lot of things at them. Let's do this, let's do this, let's explore this, let's explore that. My feeling and belief is that sometimes you have to have a lot of balls in the air because you're not sure which one you're going to catch or which one will be ready to be caught. And so we're looking at lots of different things, and the staff has been terrific. And we get terrific feedback from the public as well about the job they're doing. But we're behind. We're behind in our infrastructure, and we're going to catch up. Transparency and communication is another area that I am focused on and we are focused on as a city. The first item there I mentioned is greater openness. Again, with the new website and technology, you can now have access, audio access to virtually every committee, board, task force, city council meeting throughout the city. So if you're not able to go, you're able to get that information. Budget permitting, we're looking at thinking about videotaping our council meetings and getting that available as well. I mentioned the budget process. We had greater availability and visibility into our budget process than we ever have. We're also looking at participating in the state's open checkbook program, if you're familiar with that, where eventually you can go right online and see essentially every check and every dollar that the city spends if that's information that you want access to. We've tried to enhance the communication to our residents. The mayor's report is something that I was pleasantly surprised people actually like to hear, and it's been fun. It's been really fun to do as a way of letting people know what's really going on in the community most currently. But the website has expanded our community calendar. We've now providing better electronic notice of meeting changes or cancellations or rescheduling. We now have a new section, if you haven't found it on the website, where you can actually submit a request. So if there's standard kinds of things like a traffic light out or a pothole, you can always call City Hall, but you can also go right online and request that issue be addressed by our staff. Resident participation is something else I've been encouraging. I'll just give you again one example. Many of you know we've got lots of committees and task forces in the community. And we have residents and citizens who participate in those. We tried to expand the availability and the ability for people to participate, residents to participate in those committees. And so you can now go online and express an interest in a particular committee, provide your full description of your expertise, and you're now part of our database as we're looking for replacement numbers for any number of committees. So lots of ways to participate in our community. Next area, regionalism. Earl and prior councils and mayors did an amazing job in the area of regionalism. I'm a huge supporter of it. A challenging area and one that takes time. So most of you know our joint dispatch for police and fire. All emergency services are now dispatched out of a single center with 5 different communities. The county health department is providing all of our health services like they do for, frankly, most of the rest of the county. And we're looking at other areas where we can look at regionalism as a way of providing broader and more effective services. So I'll just give you one example that we're exploring, the Community Partnership on Aging. Here's another example of multiple communities coming together to provide additional services to senior citizens. It's something we're looking at. And we'll continue to advocate for more of them. We'll also say that in some cases, some people say, well, we're not sure that we want to go with other communities or do something formally, or we can't get other communities, which is really more often the case. Shaker's been way more open to regionalized approaches than some of our adjoining neighbors. But in some cases, we can also do it synthetically. And what I mean by synthetically is that we have agreements or coordinated efforts, whether or not 2 organizations or departments are merged, we still provide complementary services, and we're doing a lot of work making sure that equipment that we buy is complementary to those in other communities that support us as well. Sustainability. And I promise you just a couple more, and then we'll get to your questions. Sustainability is something that I'm very focused on. We wanted to upgrade it, so we had a task force that's been in place for several years. We upgraded the Sustainability Task Force to a committee. We've now staffed it. If those of you who know Michael Peters, who is a very accomplished professional in this area, and we are looking to do a variety of things on the sustainability front. This is just one example of some of Michael and others' handiwork. This is an electric car station, a charging station over at the dealership. So everything from recycling to electric charging stations to solar and others are things that we are very, very much focused on and hope to expand in the coming months and years. And then lastly, but frankly, and certainly not least, is a focus on our people. I think many of you have heard me talk about this before, but at the end of the day, most communities have houses, they have businesses, they have buildings, they've got schools, but it's who inhabits those buildings and schools, and who lives in those communities, and it's our focus on our people, whether they be a wide range of professionals, a wide range of socioeconomic, racial diversity. It's really what makes our community truly special. As we all know, we had some challenges over the past year between Fernway, the loss of Aisha Frazier, the recent fire on Lytle. And it's just amazing to see the community really step up and provide that support. In terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion, there's a tremendous amount going on in this community. For those of you who may not be as in tune between the city with our Human Relations Task Force, to the task force, Equity Task Force at the schools, to SHAC, providing a format for these discussions. If you haven't seen, is Monica Moon here tonight? Okay, wasn't sure I didn't see her. Anyway, for those of you who haven't met Monica, she is doing some really terrific things. It's just a simple example of promoting candid, open, and sometimes challenging discussions in our community. And so, in all kinds of formats. So we look forward to that. We build on it as part of our DNA, as part of our past, and we continue to focus on it. What I have been saying is that what we want to make sure is that all residents share equally in our future, whether that be in the schools, in our neighborhoods, in our community. And it's not something that we just think about on Martin Luther King Day or when there's a special event. This is something that we think about every day, every program, every initiative that we undertake. This is something that is a common thread throughout everything that we do. So with that, I've probably gone over my 30 or so minutes, but I appreciate your patience and I look forward to your questions.
Okay. If you haven't had a chance and you would like to ask the mayor a question, can you write it and then someone will hold it up? I'd also like to introduce Catherine LaCroix. She is the incoming chair of the League of Women Voters of Greater Cleveland. And so she's going to be the moderator tonight with your questions. So if you have any, write them down and hold them up. Thank you.
Thank you for this wonderful and engaging presentation. If you can keep the microphone, I've got the deck of questions.
Okay.
We've got a range of really interesting, oh good, thank you. We've gotten a range of really interesting looking questions over the course of your talk. And I'd like to, some are very general, some are rather specific, so I want to open up with a business-related one. Why should companies move to Shaker? And related to that, do you believe in offering tax incentives to companies to move to Shaker?
Okay, so I'm happy. Whoever asked the question, thank you. Good question. But why should companies come to Shaker? So, you know, there are lots of reasons, and I think I've kind of tried to touch on many of them. But again, what I'm hoping to do is provide a community where people can live and work and raise a family all in the same community, and that we are welcoming across the board to every aspect of someone's life. And so I mentioned young people, but the number of people moving back to, just as an example, moving back to Shaker from other communities, they don't have cars, they don't want a car, they want to raise a family, and they want to walk to their child to school, and they want to be able to walk to work, and they want to work, they want to work hard, but there's also a life balance concern for them, and they want to know that when they're done working, they can walk out of their office or their place of employment, or frankly, in many cases, out of their home, and be able to walk with their children and find everything that they need in their community. And there are lots of reasons, I think, for this. Lots of sort of macroeconomic issues, whether it be the internet and online sales and how we connect. But I'm a big believer that at the end of the day, people are looking, they may go online to buy goods, but what they fundamentally want, we are social animals and social beings at the end of the day. And people want to spend time face to face. And so anyway, that's one of the reasons that they should come. Along with a lot of other ones, by the way. I'll just give you one other example why businesses should come, and that's our location. So we have some incredible assets in this community, but we're a couple miles. If you think of where we're talking about the office building in Warrensville and Sugar End, we're a couple miles from 480 to go east-west. We are a couple miles from 271 to go north-south. We have 2 rapid lines that take you downtown. There are very, very few communities that offer that. And so that's some of what we are, some of the reasons why we're attracting these businesses to our community. With respect to the tax incentives, I would say the answer Short answer is yes, with some caveats. And the caveats are they need to be well targeted and they need to be effective. And whether it's tax incentives, I would say that maybe to talk about just incentives generally. We have lots of different ways to try to attract people to our community. Not all require incentives, but in some cases they do. And to be competitive, we often do need to do that. So it may come in lots of different flavors. So for instance, some of our infill housing that we're encouraging new development to come in on. We have offered tax abatement for some of our new housing. We have a storefront renovation program where we help people reinvest on a shared basis into their business facilities. We have used some targeted incentives, some vision loan funds. In fact, this latest company that we're working with, we are talking to them about that. But what we're doing, and I'll just give you this as an example of this latest company, we are in competition with other communities, and we would like to win that competition to have this company come here for lots of different reasons. They produce significant income tax, and so in some cases what we are doing, and most recently, is really creating an incentive that provides a pay-as-you-go. So we're not actually coming out of pocket dollars, but we're providing incentives that cause them to come and grow here, increase our income tax and our property taxes, which then underwrites that growth. So, yeah, when needed and targeted, we'll do it.
Okay, thanks. There are a number of questions about transportation. You mentioned automotive. You know, it's easy to get here and there by car, but we have RTA for our regional transportation, and there's some interest in optimizing public transportation within Shaker for people, Shaker residents, to get around within Shaker, as well as, you know, regionally elsewhere in the area.
Yeah. So on transportation, again, that's one of these key assets that we have in Shaker that really truly makes us unique as compared to other communities. With respect to transportation within Shaker, that's also something that we are focused on, particularly with the commercial districts. So for instance, one of the things we've talked about is how we can actually market the 3 commercial districts, one outside of our municipal boundaries, but Shaker Square, the Van Aken, so the Chagrin Van Aken corridor, and then the Van Aken district. And the ability to ride the rapid, frankly, back and forth, it's a matter of minutes to get from Shaker Square to the Van Aken district. And so one of the things that we have started to have some conversations with, for instance, with the RTA, we're not there yet, but we're going to keep trying, whether there's a way that we could, for instance, have either a reduced or a free or some kind of reciprocal arrangement for those people that are riding the rapid from those commercial districts. Again, in my mind, something like that, or something like that, promotes economic growth, promotes people wanting to come live here. It's an advantage. It's a value add for our taxes that we pay, which I hear every day about and I'm very focused on. And so those are the kinds of things that we should be focusing on.
Okay. Good. I've also gotten a plug in here for more bike lanes, just so you know. There's an interest in more bike lanes on our major streets.
Yeah, that is something that we continue to look at. Obviously in Shaker, it's always a little bit of a challenge because we have streets that are of multiple widths. I will say though that we have worked hard on the bike paths to enable people to get really a lot around our community. Everything, the latest one, connecting Fairhill to Lower Lake. I mentioned the Warrensville, the Van Aken district. We've now have funding in place, and construction will start with the new bike and walking trail, basically from our southern border at the post office all the way up to the rock gym. So that will start this spring. So we continue to focus on it.
Thank you. Another amenity question, which is especially timely. As we add multi-unit residential areas, particularly around Van Aken, there's an interest in increasing the number of playgrounds for children, and I think more generally accessible green space for residents of the new multifamily units in order to make them fully attractive. Playgrounds, and specifically parks and public spaces and playgrounds that are not at schools, so they're available during the school day to families with smaller children.
A good question, and actually one that's sort of interesting is I think if I had to guess, I would say that most of you, as did I for many years, frankly, haven't looked at a map of Shaker Heights that shows just the green space in our community. But there's a tremendous amount of green space in some places where you least expect it, unless you happen to live in that particular neighborhood. So for instance, the Gridley Triangle area is, has an amazing amount of activity, particularly in the good weather, unrelated to a school. And there are many, many others. And obviously our parks, Horseshoe Lake, as well as that green space. But we continue to try to find areas where we can continue to expand it. Obviously, the Van Aken district, we've got called the living room out there in front of Mitchell's. But it's a good question. Hard to do in a built-out community, but obviously always something that we can work on. So just since I mentioned Fernway, yeah, it may end up that Fernway is our next park, because the city may actually end up owning the area next to Fernway in order to provide access to some dollars and resources. So that may be our latest park that'll ultimately get renovated.
Thank you. Also, if you have a question that comes to your mind as I'm asking these, please don't hesitate to wave your hand and someone will come and pick up the question for you. I have a couple of environmental questions. Do we have a lead problem in any neighborhoods, lead pipe, lead paint? And if so, what is the city doing about education and abatement?
Well, any community, ultimately, any community that was built out as early as we have been in some of our older homes do have potential lead problems. And so it is something that we're always concerned about. We actually, and Jerry Chaikin's here somewhere. Hi, Jerry. We looked at this at lead, what year? A couple years ago?
About 2 or 3 years ago, what was originally the Climate Change Task Force, now the Sustainability Committee, had a forum here with a number of other parties and experts on lead, and talked about how the Cuyahoga County Board of Health deals with properties that have lead in them, particularly rental properties, and they had studied the lead issue in Shaker, and it had been high in certain communities, but it was now pretty much low compared to other communities in Cuyahoga County.
Yeah, so statistically, the number of people that have children or adults with lead issues in Shaker are substantially lower than most other communities. And lead, I will say, is also, as many of you may know, along with asbestos, in and of itself is not problematic in all cases. It's when it becomes what's sometimes called friable or airborne that becomes the issue. So, for instance, with asbestos, many times the appropriate approach to mitigating is actually encapsulating it. Same thing with lead paint. What we're concerned about is when we do home inspections, point of sale inspections, where, for instance, windows are rubbing and can create loose and airborne lead, as opposed to those that are well maintained, painted, and regularly maintained by homeowners. It may not be as much an issue, but it is something that we are focused on.
And do you have an education program in effect for Shaker residents to help them learn more about lead issues?
We do, although we tie in mostly to the county's initiative on that.
Now, another issue that a number of people are interested in has to do with And I'm not going to ask about the little scooters for trash pickup. Instead, I'm going to ask another question about trash pickup, which is plastics recycling. What is the status of the city's plastic recycling efforts? Because we're diligently putting stuff in our little tiny buckets, and that's another fight, and we don't know what happens to it. So can we discuss that?
Boy, okay, so where do we start? So first, let me put a plug into the Sustainability Committee, because we will be discussing, along with our Public Works Department, we work on recycling and this issue. Let me just say, as a very general, high-level matter, I think most of you are probably aware that the state of recycling worldwide is in a complete state of flux. And so we have literally gone, in many, many instances, from a position where we actually were paid for our recycling to a position today where, in many cases, in many communities, are paying someone else to take their recyclables. I shouldn't say it started, but in large part, it started, I think, came to the fore of the public when China stopped accepting recycled materials. So we have been very, very diligent about providing information to the community in all formats. There's an app for recycling. There's a website for recycling. There are print copies of what we're essentially doing. But to be honest with you, it is it's a very disappointing and frustrating stage for recycling right now, where essentially we've gone back to basically the basics of newspaper, glass, aluminum cans. Those are the only things that we can recycle. And so, and in many cases, what's made it even more challenging is that the people that were accepting our recycled materials, if they are quote-unquote contaminated, meaning that there is anything in that stream that cannot be recycled, they're either kicking it back to us or charging us for it. And so we're in a very, very difficult position trying to maintain the level of information that we care about in this community. And I know, I speak for all of us, who've spent years trying to get ourselves to recycle. Now we have, and then suddenly we're thrown, we take 2 steps back and say, oh, why can't we do that? And so it is very difficult. But basically there are 5 categories. We're continuing to recycle in those areas. One of the reasons, I will just say, some people have asked, why do we still have those small buckets? Why don't we have the big buckets? And there are lots of different reasons, but one of the reasons of late, with respect to recycling, is that people who man the scooters are able to actually see what are in those buckets and make sure that there is nothing in the buckets that will then end up contaminating that recyclable material. And frankly, it's as simple as, for instance, a doggy poop bag that falls into a glass, recycling glass. It gets kicked out, lock, stock, and barrel. So I think Julie, I think when in doubt, throw it out. Right. Which is, it's just, I know it cuts against the grain of all of us, but unfortunately, that's sort of the state that we are in.
This is a hot topic on Living in Shaker Heights Facebook page, I have to say, and I'm sure you guys can monitor that. Another environmental question, solar energy. We've got all these beautiful homes with slate roofs. Is there any education or plan regarding encouraging solar energy in Shaker Heights?
Yes, I hope. And yes, we're going to try to make that happen. For those of you who know me, I use the phrase that I love efficiency. I'm one of those kind of efficiency geeks. Like, if we can do 2 things at the same time, or frankly, if I can get something for free, it's like, yeah, that is really cool, right? So to me, solar energy, every day, from my way of thinking, every day that we walk outside and we see the sun, and we're not capturing that, we're letting dollars literally just fall through the cracks. The difficulty is making the economics work, but we are working actively to try to find ways to take advantage of solar. So for instance, the county, we joined an initiative by the county who took all their proposed solar needs and band together with other communities that were looking at solar and put out an RFP to reduce the costs for solar. So our hope is, with some luck, that we would start with at least one of the city buildings, probably, hopefully, the Public Works building on Chagrin, where it's a big flat roof. I will say though that it's to say that you want to do solar, it's easier said than done. I know for my building where we had Juma, I looked at solar panels for our for the building rooftop, and you got to spend some time and effort to make the numbers pencil out. But there are lots of initiatives. There's the solar co-op that's promoting solar on residential homes. It's something that I'm very, very much in favor of.
I've got another question in about plastic, so I want to circle back to that for a minute. Would our plastics and our recycling situation be improved if Shaker banned the use of single-use plastic bags? Exception for doggy bags.
Yeah, and look, I think reasonable minds can differ on some of these issues, but that's another one where, the way I view this is very much an issue that we all need to take ownership of. I have several bags in the back of my car. I never, or rarely, actually, I never get plastic. I rarely even get the paper bags. Once in a while I get the paper bags so I can put all the newspapers in so that then I can just recycle all of that. But it is something that I firmly believe is something that is truly an individual responsibility, and it's upon everyone's shoulders to participate and make that happen. Frankly, if no one took plastic bags, there wouldn't be a reason to use plastic bags if people didn't take them. So that's where I'm just a big believer in individual responsibility.
Do you think that the 2019 budget will be able to support a cost of living adjustment for police, fire, public works, and other city employees?
A really good question. A very good question. So for those of you who may not know kind of the background on this question, I mentioned during my remarks that we're in labor negotiations with all of our unions. Our public works union negotiations actually took place, took place in 2018. Police and fire and a small rec union are being negotiated this year. The negotiations with the public works union, we got to a point where we had a tentative agreement at the end of last year. But to be honest with you, we've seen some fluctuations in our tax revenues, particularly starting in November and December. We think it's, we're still exploring the reasons for it. I firmly believe that it's in large part due to some of the changes in our tax laws, and that is causing people to delay the time at which they're paying some of their individual local taxes, particularly income tax through RETA. So we saw a drop-off, significant drop-off at the end of the year as we were finalizing the 2019 budget. The tentative agreement with Public Works was not approved by the union at the end of the year, and so we were in a position where it was very difficult to finalize the 2019 budget with a cost of living adjustment when we were still in negotiations with our Public Works department, our Public Works union. So part of the decision made, and my hats off to council as well as the administration, to say we are going to do the fiscally responsible thing, and that is to make sure that we have the dollars available to pay our bills. And it's hard, I use the expression, sometimes it's hard to play poker when you don't know how many chips you have in front of you, and that's kind of the stage we were in. We really didn't know until we can see how the tax revenues play out over the next few months. So what we did is basically defer that decision into 2019. We are seeing a little bit of a recovery, although I'd like to see more than what we've seen to date. So certainly my hope is that we would have a cost of living adjustment for all of our unions coming this year, but we'll have to sort of see how the tax revenues play out over the first part of the year. Let me just say, this was a very, very difficult decision. It was a difficult decision for the administration to recommend a delay in cost of living adjustments for our employees who work very, very hard. It was very difficult for council. It was something we debated for quite a bit, but I think ultimately we decided it was the right thing to do at this moment, and the hope is that we will in fact be able to incorporate a cost of living adjustment into the final 2019 budget.
I guess that underscores that we have an ambitious agenda here, but we also have some constraints. Now, you mentioned a sense of community and excellent public schools as assets to attracting and retaining residents. This comment or question concerns efforts to promote inclusion and diversity in Shaker, and going along with this is a question about how you plan to work with the new school superintendent. So I think there's an overarching question here, which is, I think, an explication of the relationship between the city and the schools on issues of diversity and inclusion. Probably would be a helpful point to address.
Okay, let me start out, and many of you, I know, have heard this from me before, but it's worth repeating for those who might not. We absolutely are a very diverse community. If you look at Shaker compared to across the country, we absolutely are. But it tends to be at a macro level, and if we look at a more micro level, less so, both in our schools and in our neighborhoods. And so that is an area that we continue to focus on and work on. I would say, though, going back to my earlier comments, that this is something that is not someone else's issue. This is all of our issues. This is something that we feel strongly about as a community, and I think it's sometimes too easy to say, what's the city doing about this, or what are the schools doing about that, or why don't we do more, when in fact there are a huge number of people very, very committed and devoted to equity and inclusion and diversity in our community in lots of different settings. And again, it's incumbent upon all of us to take advantage, frankly, of the opportunities, as well as do your part in helping us maintain this reputation. It is our history, and it is something that I know this community feels very, very strongly about. And it's taking place more than ever in all kinds of corners of our community. For those of you, and just again, a couple examples. The schools are doing a tremendous job with their equity task force, and the training that's going on through the cohorts, through the schools. The city's doing its part with the Human Relations Task Force, neighbor nights. I see Vicki Elder and many others who are here in this room every month, meeting with neighbors, talking about how we can better address these issues. And frankly, one of the great things about this community is we don't shy away from these tough issues. And you got to start by being comfortable about talking about these issues. The library, has held several programs. I was mentioning Monica Boone. She had a program, what, February? Performance-based program talking about equity and inclusion and diversity in our community that was absolutely fabulous. Diverse audience, diverse participation. It was terrific. Shaq, if you missed the performance of a couple weeks ago of the fictionalized meeting of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. Talking to each other, it was also just fabulous. It's happening in churches, it's happening in our libraries, it's happening in our schools. And so there's a lot of work being done there. Are we where we want to be? No, I will be the first to admit. But again, to me, it is something that needs to be discussed and addressed in every aspect of what we do. So whether it's housing, whether it's attracting businesses, whether it's supporting our neighborhoods, and there are other things that I think, frankly, we can probably explore. Those of us that have been around for a long time knew about the Fund for the Future, where we provided a financial incentive for people to move into neighborhoods that increased diversity. I'm not necessarily saying that that's the right program for today, but it's the kind of thing that we have a history of doing, and we'll continue to do.
Last call for questions. I have a couple more here, but any more that have been prompted, please do hand them in. There are a couple questions here about Van Aken as an attraction and as a benefit to local residents. The first question is specifically about an update on many retail developments at Van Aken, what's coming and what's not. And then a related question, well, these are separate, but they're both about Van Aken, which is whether there's any particular effort to hire local residents in the Van Aken district at the various retail and other establishments.
Well, let me address that, the latter question. We certainly are looking to hire locally, as well as lease locally. As many of you may know, many of the retail tenants in the Van Aken district have a local connection, and that's one of the things. And again, in fairness to RMS, the developer of the Van Aken district, you know, I know there's been some over the months, some discussion about why isn't it leased up faster, and why isn't it all filled, and why is there still a vacancy here and there. And one of the explanations is that we could have filled up, they could have leased all that space with regional or national tenants, but they chose not to. And in many cases, not across the board, we have a mixture, but many of the tenants have a local ownership or relationship either to Shaker or elsewhere. Double Rainbow, for instance, is a good example. Whiskey Grade, Groove Ride, Aaron Andrews, who else? And basically others. So they've been very patient to try to find locally based businesses. Mitchell's, obviously another one. So very much so. In terms of the leasing, and I'm not telling, well, a couple things. One is that what we tried to create at Van Aken is something very different than what other communities have done. We tried to create something, and you all participated. If you lived in Shaker long enough, we probably got your input back in the late 90s and the early 2000s about what we wanted to see. We wanted an organic, we wanted a walkable neighborhood shopping area, a place for us to eat, dine, and shop. And that's really what we have created. But we've done it in a very measured way. Frankly, there's not as much retail as other developments, but people have heard me talk about how difficult retail is in today's environment. We are in a state of flux. And so you're going to have to find the best of the best, and you're going to have to find a reason to have them here in our community. And frankly, we need to have a community that supports them, as we have. I will be the first to admit, This community has been incredible to many of the long-term businesses, including Juma, for instance. We wouldn't be around without the support of the community, and we expect to see the same thing and have seen it with the Van Aken District and elsewhere. But there's a lot of good things happening. If you aren't quite in tune with dates, Brassica, the newest restaurant, will open up in a couple weeks out of Regional, based out of Columbus. The restaurant is, I'm told, is fabulous. Opens in a couple weeks. Jonathan Sawyer is under construction. His restaurant will open up within a couple months. Michael's is well underway. Should it be open up in the next, I'd say, probably 30 to 60 days. So a lot of things still yet to come.
Has there been any particular effort to promote minority-owned businesses in the Van Aken District?
We try. That's an area that I'll be candid with you. We I shouldn't say, well, it's everyone's responsibility, but not as many as we frankly would like to have. We'd like to have it more reflective of our community, but stay tuned, and I think you'll see some further developments on that area. But it is something that we regularly talk about. We talk about with RMS, and look at it.
A couple questions about citizen engagement. Now, generally, we feel ourselves to be a pretty engaged group, but good questions about what can we citizens do to make a difference, and specifically, do you have any views on what we can do to increase turnout in local elections? Because people don't always show up to vote, even in a community like Shaker.
Yeah, probably well, again, this comes back to my firm belief in sort of that personal responsibility, that is something that we have not done as good a job instilling in our community as a general philosophy. One of the lowest turnout rate, not necessarily Shaker, but the United States as a whole, for a democracy like ours. So we do have a pretty active and certainly a very engaged community, but we don't get out like we should. So part of it is probably me with the bully pulpit of being the mayor to facilitate that more than we do.
Do you think that there are any common misperceptions about Shaker that you would like to take this opportunity to dispel?
That's fine.
I guess I would say that, yeah, for those people, it's kind of like Cleveland, right? I mean, the joke sometimes that we hear about Cleveland, and then you ask them, have you ever been to Cleveland? And they say, well, no, we haven't been to Cleveland. And it's sort of the same in Shaker, I think, depending on a variety of factors. Some people have certain misconceptions or beliefs about Shaker. I think what I would like to say is that we are as welcoming and diverse a community as we could possibly be, and that there's something here for everyone, whether it be the type of housing, the price point, the neighborhood, the style of home, and that we're open for business, and that we are expanding our business tax base like we never have before. And for those that think we are only a residential community, we are not. And that we have something to offer that frankly most people, most communities cannot offer. Between our people, our physical beauty, our place to work, our place to play, a place to educate our children. And not too many communities out there that have all of what we have. And so I think people may pick out one or two of those things, but don't recognize that we have the whole package. And you can live, play, work, and go to school all here in Shaker.
Via rapid transit or some other form of transit, we hope. And your bike, on your bike. Okay. Well, this seems like a wonderful note on which to sort of wrap this up. We really appreciate your time. We know you have many very busy days and that you spend your entire day meeting and talking to people, so we're glad that you can come here and meet and talk with us. I also was happy to hear about your emphasis on increased transparency, which is of course something that the League of Women Voters is all about. And just since I have the microphone, I'd like to put in a little plug for something that the League of Women Voters of Shaker Heights has been doing for decades, which is we send observers to all important city meetings, city council, zoning, planning, etc. And we report on them on the League of Women Voters Shaker Heights website. So if you wonder sometimes what is happening, there is another expert, dedicated, public-spirited source, and that's us. So, anyway, so thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And if you have